This is part 2 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 2 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 1, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will continue with the disassembly. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Continuing with the disassembly, we will disassemble the Quill spindle assembly. And I'm just removing that 1/4 inch by 20 screw that locks down the feed stop bracket, and it has a nut and a lock washer for it. Then we'll go ahead and remove the jam nut that's on the bottom of the feed stop rod. And once we get that off of there, we can go ahead and remove the feed stop rod. Alright, for the rest of this, we'll take the Quill spindle assembly over to a vise. We're going to put a somewhat large 9mm Allen wrench inside the chuck. We're just going to line up the flats with the jaws and then tighten it down inside that chuck. And then we will place the Allen wrench inside the vise. And then I'm going to loosen the safety lock collar and use a spanner wrench to remove it, or to completely loosen it. Then we should be able to pull the spindle out of the chuck. Then we can remove the feed stop bracket, just slides right off of there. And then we can pull that chuck back out of the vise, take that Allen wrench out of it, set that aside, and we'll come back to the chuck later. Next, we're going to remove the retaining ring that is on the Quill. Now there should be a washer there as well, but this one is missing. I think it's part number 14 on the parts diagram, but I'm just going to use 2 vice grips to expand that retaining ring and then lift it off of the Quill. And there we go. There's also a washer inside the feed stop bracket. We'll get to that later. So there are these retaining rings that hold the bearings in place on the spindle. So we need to remove the retaining ring. There's 2 of them, one at each end. So we'll remove this one. Like so. And then we can go ahead and drive the spindle down through that bearing. Make sure that's tight in the vise. And I'm just using a brass tip hammer. Once we get close to the bearing, we'll use a brass punch to get it the rest of the way. You'll see me kind of change my stance here in a minute so that I can catch the spindle with my leg so it doesn't strike the floor. There we go. And there's your spindle. So now we just need to get that bearing out of the Quill. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to use a wooden dowel. And sometimes you can just kind of smack it out of there. If not, then we'll grab the hammer and tap it out. There it goes. Alright, so now we have the spindle and the bearing that's on it, and there's another retaining ring. So we just need to remove that retaining ring. See if I can get a bite on both of the little holes in it and then lift it off of there. And then just like we did for the other bearing, we're going to drive the spindle through this bearing. So I'm just balancing the bearing on the jaws of the vise. Then we'll use that punch. And I'm doing that catch the spindle thing with my leg again. And we've almost got it. And here we go. Alright, the only thing left on the spindle is that spindle thrust collar. We're not going to remove it. So here we are with the head casting. We're going to remove that machine screw where my thumb was. So this was one of the changes from the 150 series, which had machine screws on both sides. Starting with the Gen 2 and going all the way through the Gen 4s of the Emersons, there was only one machine screw. And this holds the bearing inside the head casting. It kind of wedges it. The screw goes across the top of that bottom bearing for the spindle pulley assembly, so it keeps the spindle pulley assembly from coming up and out of the drill press. And if you're interested in more information about the internal operations of the drill press, I'll link a video for it here. But we're just going to remove that machine screw. And now the spindle pulley assembly should come out of the drill press. So the way we're going to get it out is we're going to get a wooden dowel. We'll brace that just on the bottom of the spindle pulley assembly and then tap it with the mallet. So there's two bearings on there. So the first one came out. And the second one we just need to get realigned with that top bore. And then smack it out. There we go. We'll set that aside. Next, we're going to remove the guard plate, and there are two screws that hold it in place. And this is what the belt guard mounts to and balances on. Each one of these screws has a little lock washer on the bottom side. There we go. Next we have the trim panel, and it just has two screws that hold it on. And there we go. And then we have the mounting plate, which is where the on-off switch is, and the light bulb is sitting under it, and the motor plugs into it. There are 4 screws that hold this onto the head casting. And I should have removed the light bulb first. You can access it from the bottom of the head casting. And it would have been easier because the bulb that's in here is too big to pull out through this top opening, but no big deal. And it just uses a standard light bulb. I'll end up putting an LED bulb in there. I'm not a big fan of incandescent bulbs. And there you can see the bulb. We'll just unscrew it and let it fall back into the head casting. There we go. We'll set that aside. And we'll just lift the head casting, get that bulb out of there. And we'll set the head casting aside. You can see there's some dirt dauber nests inside there as well. Here we are with the belt cover. And you've got 4 screws that hold the end cap on. We're going to remove 2 of them first. And these are pretty small machine screws. All these are the same size. There's 3 on the top for the spindle cover. So we'll remove all 3 of those, and the spindle cover will kind of just drop down through the belt cover. And if you notice that big cutout there in the top of the belt cover, that's so that the column can protrude through there if you want to lower that head down on the column. So with all 3 of those screws out, that spindle cover will come right out of there. Then we've got the last 2 screws for the end cap. Now that clear plexiglass or Lexan or whatever it is, end cap shield, I guess, that has the speeds on it that you can see through. It's glued into that gray plastic frame. So removing it is kind of a pain in the butt. All right. So now we'll go ahead and disassemble the spindle pulley assembly. And just like on a 100 or a 150, you have a inner retaining ring. We just need to expand that and lift it off of there. Sometimes one of the sides gets kind of stuck inside the channel that it sits in. if you just play with it a little bit, you'll get it. Get it to walk a little bit. There we go. And this is what retains the bearings on the spindle pulley assembly. And there we go. Then we've got the bearings. Sometimes you can slide them off of there, but in this case we're going to use a puller. Now we'll be replacing all of the ball bearings in this drill press and in the motor. There we go. There's your first bearing. There's a spacer sleeve. There we go. And then that last bearing. So that bearing is kind of far down there and my puller won't reach under it. So I like to lift up the bearing a little bit, and I just use 2 wrenches to do that. You got to be careful here not to bend the sheaves on the pulley itself. Might be a good idea to kind of spray down that inner race and the shaft with some WD-40 before you try to do that. I don't think I'm high enough yet for that puller to get up under it. Nope. So let's try that again. I think that's good. Yep. So we'll just spin that bearing off of there. And I like these 2-prong pullers over a 3-prong puller. They're just easier to operate in my opinion. So there's that last bearing. And there's your spindle pulley. Alright, so here we are with the mounting panel. We're just going to remove those 4 wire nuts. And then all of these, well, the receptacle and the switch both have metal clips on the side that you can depress and push them through the panel. And there we go. We'll go ahead and remove the power cable, and it's got a metal or a plastic retainer on it that expands once it's pushed through the hole, so you just need to compress it with a pair of pliers and then work it out. Then we'll go ahead and remove the light socket. It's just got 1 screw that holds it in place. And there we go. And then that last is the receptacle for the motor. These clips are a little bit stronger, but no big deal. Just press them in and push it through. Be careful you don't strip some of the shielding off of the wiring as you remove it. And there we go. And that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Don't forget there's good information down in the description of the video. In part 3, we'll complete the disassembly. And as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.